I'll start with what happened in 2014. European elections, and we see arriving in the European Parliament more than 100, more than that actually, because it depends on how you measure the level of, the ideologies that you're dealing with. More than 100 MEPs, member of the European Parliament, coming from nationalist, extreme right, and so-called populist movement. So I'm starting with a disclaimer right now. I always make a difference between the populist and the extreme right. Because populism is not exactly something that has an ideological backbone that you can pin every time. And it has common features, but it can be from the left also. And there are many leftish populists. And they're not the ones that are really interesting to me right now. What is the most worrying is a surge, not in populist, but in extreme right, in far right, nationalist, and even purely racist movements, and their institutional breakup. I'll give you a few examples. Janusz Korwin-Mikke, for instance, Polish MEP, does Nazi comments during the plenary sessions of the European Parliament. He's been sanctioned, of course, for that, but still, he's there. You cannot strip him from a mandate that he received from the people. You have the Golden Dawn MEPs from Greece. I'll come back to this, but this is the only measure of fascism, of extreme right from the south of Europe. And this is an interesting feature that we need also to address. But you have also a lot of extremely unsavory and, how should I say, politically incorrect, but not in the right sense in this case, comments coming from all over the places. You don't have to be a sheer Nazi like Golden Dawn to actually qualify for this extreme right surge. They've been to the point that they could create, it wasn't evident in the very beginning in 2014, but it happened in the course of 2015. They were able to manage to create a group, a political group in the European Parliament. We need 7 different nationalities and 25 MEPs. They had the numbers because the Front National itself was 24, the French Front National was 24, and they managed to drag and bring some elements, including some MEPs from the Korwin-Mikke party. Not him, because it's too obvious, but some of them that were for lower profile. Since then they have a group. They have a group, and the group means also more means, more speaking time, more visibility, and everything that parliamentary democracy, because the European Parliament is the element of a European democracy in the making, that offers you. So it was a shock. And it's been going on and on and on since 2014. It's coming from before, I'm coming to this, but it's been going until the November 2016 with the shock of the Trump election, which, mind you, is not exactly far right, but is inspired by far right people, like Bannon. So I would say that Trump is the embodiment of a right-wing populist. He's not a Nazi, he's not an extreme right guy. I think he's more or less a clueless politician or wannabe politician, but his inspiration is definitely dragging also from the far right. Not only, I mean, he's got a Tea Party and many other things, but he has also some very nasty far right inspiration behind him. So it was peaking in there. Then it has somewhat receded, but I'll come to this. Where does it come from? It's not 2014. It's not just now. It's old. It's much older. It's not connected only to the social crisis. I mean, it started, I would say, it's not even connected to European Union. I mean, Blocher of the UDC in Switzerland is neither coming from a country that has a social crisis, nor from a country that is European Union member. Austria in the 2000s, no social crisis. I mean, no real social crisis, the one that you read in the textbook that really feed fascism, okay? Sweden, the Swedish Democrats, it's a formerly Nazi party that ditched its Nazi pet to become some kind of a respectable movement. They came to parliament, and without their support there was no Swedish government. And then when it was impossible, then there was some kind of a coalition, not a coalition, but sorry, but gentleman's agreement between governing parties that there would be no need for their support, and they would have minority governments that would be supported on the most important budgets. Messerschmitt, MEP from the Danish Folk Party, also former extreme right, now respectable, member, not even member of the Marine Le Pen's group, but from another group called the European Conservative and Reformist group, in which you find the Tories from Britain, well, for another 2 years at least, in which you find also respectable government movements, and in which you find also the peace. So it's coming from further than just the crisis. It's fed by common features. The first one is the fear of Islam. The second is the fear of Europe. There is a strong, articulated narrative that powers this surge of right-wing populism. I'll put them together because now it makes sense. There is a strong narrative, a Weltanschauung, if you prefer, a representation of the world that is both simple and not stupid, like a lot of their opponents would say, oh man, they're stupid, they're Europhobe. No, they're not stupid, they are Eurosceptic, they are Europhobe, but they're dangerous because they're not stupid. Because what they're bringing in the debate is something that makes sense. And that's exactly the problem. It makes sense. What is their narrative, basically? That Europe is an old millennium civilization built upon fierce, proud, and independent nations, most of them nation-states, but not all of them, because this is the reason why you would find the Flemish NVA in this representation, that are threatened today by two arch enemies that are both abstract and very concrete. The first one is, of course, Islam, because it threatens the European civilization that is at heart Christian, and you can find the whole narrative that has been the one of every right-wing nationalist, especially on Central and Balkanic Europe. The one that we defend Europe against the Turks, against the infidels, against the Mongols, the one that you can find in the Milosevic narrative, for instance, and in the Serbian nationalist approach, but also in Orban. Orban is not part of this group of extreme right. Actually, he's one of the pillars of EPP, the Christian Democrats. And it's still there. And Orban is doing this kind of stuff. He is taking that kind of narrative. He is putting a fence at the borders to protect Europe, of course, to protect Hungary, but to protect Europe from those barbarians, the all imaginary of the great invasions. He even used in his rhetoric the Völkerwanderung narrative. If you speak German, you know what it means. If you don't, it means the great movement of population, which, mind you, when you come from a French or let's say Western side, you would call, with a Roman perspective, the great invasions. You see, the Völkerwanderung, which was the migration of the Germanic people in the 5th century, was for them a migration, and for the Roman Empire it was an invasion. But it's the same thing. But he's using this, and he used it as such in the German debate as well. So they're trying also to build this narrative. So fear of Islam, fear of the danger on civilization, the moral panic, the cultural panic that can bring this. And it comes to, in certain countries, to an equation. A migrant or refugee, it's the same, who cares about the difference? Migrants and refugees equals Islam equals terrorists. And it's not a shortcut that I'm making. This is a shortcut that I've heard, that I've seen, even in elite people. In Poland, in Budapest. Well, in Budapest the elites have fled most of the time, so it's the Orban elites. It's the leaders of the country. So, Islam is the first one. Europe is the second one. Why is Europe such a problem? Because Europe is this supranational negation by technocratic, unelected people who just want to impose their will on the proud nation and their independence. And this does not only concern Central Europe, it concerns a lot of the French debate. And during the last French election, if you take left and right, there were only 3 candidates out of 11, 3, that didn't want to either destroy or curb the European Union. 3. Fortunately, one of them won, but none of the others made it to the second round. Benoît Hamon did not even, was that close to not being reimbursed of his expenses, and François Fillon anyway wanted to weaken the European Union, even though he didn't want to do that. Okay. So, this is something that is broader, and it culminated also in the West with Brexit. So these movements, we see them. They have a common feature, a common narrative that is strong and that makes sense. Europe and Islam. This simple, compelling narrative is also bolstered by charismatic leaders. It helps to have Wilders with you. It helps to have Marine Le Pen until her crash, but she is a charismatic leader. It helps to have the Frauke Petri in AfD, for instance. But they're also they're also powered by the void that they face. They face 2 kinds of votes. The first one is the generation of the Tina, the generation of there is no alternative, the generation of a depoliticized political class that is doing politics without knowing that it's doing politics. We call them neoliberal for laziness, intellectual laziness, because this is the kind of stuff that they implement, but that's not exactly the reason why they're so bad. They're so bad because they have no political backbone. They have no political reflection, and this is embodied probably by the 90s. At the end of the 90s, the Social Democrats in the EU 15, because it was before enlargement, the Social Democrats were in power almost everywhere in Europe, including in the European Commission, which they replaced Santer in 1999 with Romano Prodi. They were everywhere. They were in France, in Britain, they were everywhere except in Spain and Portugal. And yet, what kind of policies did they develop? They developed the policies of the Tina. Because there was no real social democratic backbone anymore. Because there was a void that had been hollowed, the whole ideology had been hollowed by the evolutions that were not forecast. Did it stop? We had good news at the end of 2016, and good news also in 2017. Austrian President van der Bellen got elected. He was not even part of the major parties. He was a former Green, and he was elected 3 times, by the way. Well, he was in second round, and then there was the first round that the first second round that he won, and then the second round that he won because it had to be rerun. The Netherlands, where Rutte, the centre-right liberal prime minister, won again against Wilders, that saw his numbers crumble a little bit. And France, of course. And even Germany, if you look at the polls, because this is another of the countries under election this year, AfD is going down. It's going down because it's increasingly more anti-Islam and less anti-European. They don't care about Europe anymore. They're just being rabid Pegida, if you remember the movement. So it did stop in a way, like a wave, that breaks, but it's still there. There is no reason that a movement that has 20 years of existence already would stop. It is very entrenched. I mentioned Orbán and Kaczynski because those are in government, but I could mention also the fact that Wilders is still the second in the Netherlands elections. I could mention the fact that the opposition to Emmanuel Macron is already starting to gain steam. I could mention the fact that the FPÖ is probably the next winner of the Austrian elections. Not enough to govern, of course, but enough to make a landslide, an earthquake in Austrian politics. So it can surge again anytime. There is no oof factor. It's fueled by the crisis, and I'm finished with this. It's fueled by the crisis, the numerous crises, the refugee crisis, which we shouldn't call a crisis, it's more of a challenge, and all those, they connect together. But it's fueled also by the lack of real alternative today. And I'll finish with this, because most of the time we're just, what's to do, what's to be done. Of course you can get in the street and have wrestle with a fascist. That's always good for your ego, very bad for your teeth, but that's not exactly where you win the debate. Because you will never convince the hardcore fascist, you will never convince the hardcore extreme right that they're wrong. But you can convince, because we're in democratic systems, the people who feel lost and really feel attracted to that there is an alternative. And this alternative, I mean, is in our hands most of the time. It's to bring about a desirable future. And I know we will get back to this in the discussion, but meditate just 1 second. The reason why Emmanuel Macron made it. He's not green, he's not my candidate. Well, he's my president now, but he's not green, he's not really leftish, and yet he won. He won because he produced a kind of positive mobilization that is needed. The kind of positive mobilization that make people get out of their seat and vote for this kind of alternative. There is no asymmetric mobilization like in Germany or, mind you, in the Trump-Clinton debate. So every time that you bring about in the public debate something that mobilizes people not on their anger and their fear, but on the transformation of their anger and their fear into hope, you score points against the extreme right.